easy to succeed. Have faith of a mustard seed. Get up on your feet. Rise up.
Welcome to the Drexwell SEMA Show. And I'm having another conversation with another candidate in the upcoming election. And his name is Mr. Zhavargo Jolly. Of course, he'll introduce himself soon after I'm finished. But I want to take this opportunity to thank you all for watching the show, and thank you very much for your continuous support and critique as well. I appreciate you. And thanks again. With that, I want to welcome Mr. Jolly to the Drexwell SEMA Show.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
All right. Well, Mr. Jolly, of course, I know you. A lot of viewers may not. Well, of course, they do know you because I remember you used to be the co-host for First Edition on RGC. But tell us a little bit about who Mr. Jolly is.
Well, again, I want to thank you for having me on the show. I'm a
Absolutely.
big fan, and I'm one of your supporters as well. Yes, I'm glad you mentioned First Edition on RTC, which is RTC's #1 rated radio show and, video as well. And unfortunately, you've had to be a victim of our success. But we're glad to have you as a colleague on RTC. But
we're not even going to go there.
We'll leave that for later, right? So yeah, my name is Zhavargo Jolly. I'm originally from the island of South Caicos. I grew up in South Caicos, and then we eventually moved to Providenciales, and then eventually to the U.S. to finish my studies and also to go to university. And then I came back home and also returned to the U.S. to do my postgrad. So I originally...
What did you study?
So I BA, Business Administration. That was my undergrad. And then I went back to school. I went to New York, NYU, after 2009. And this is when I came back in 2012. I just graduated when I was in the election, but we'll talk about that as well. And my specialty has been in investment management, financial management. Okay. So that's what I do now. So after returning from university the final time, I ended up running in an election, and that's where a lot of people got to know me for the first time.
Oh, okay.
So I was the deputy leader for a third party, the People's Progressive Party,
PPP.
The PPP. And we managed to gain some popularity around the island, but what we've all come to know, and I think a lot of people had known previously, is that traditionally, Turks and Caicos Islanders support one of the two major political parties. We've seen since then another third party, the PDA, come to life. But even now, I think it's only being, I won't dare to assume, but I know Mr. McLaughlin is the leader of that party. So after running in that election, I ended up working for the Turks and Caicos government in the deputy governor's office as the senior press officer for, I want to say, about 7 years.
Oh, okay.
And yeah, so I was always passionate about finding ways to support my country or finding ways to dedicate myself to my country. So even during my time in the Turks and Caicos Island government, where I really wanted to gain an understanding of how government works, because I knew this information would come in handy at some point, this valuable experience, I also joined the TCI Marine Regiment, where I was one of the members of the initial recruiting class from its inception. And I was fortunate enough to be selected as the most outstanding recruit. It's officially called the Governor's Award, which I still hold to this day. Since then, I have retired. It's very difficult to manage that kind of schedule, especially at my age with the demands. And also, I like to tout myself as a serial entrepreneur. So I'm fortunate enough to have used whatever experience and networking I have in my community to start a number of businesses. So my first company, I always tell people, is Monkey Bag Rum, which is so I started a rum manufacturing company, which is interesting because my father's it's still today. Actually, that company helped me to launch all the other companies that I started after that. But my father's a pastor, which you know.
That's right.
And my grandfather's a pastor, my mother's father. He built so he's well known in North Caicos. They call him Old Shady. Shady Henfield.
What's his name? His real name?
Shedville Henfield.
Okay.
We call him Shady Henfield. He actually built the Church of God of Prophecy in Bottle Creek, North Caicos, and in Q. So everybody knows him because he would leave Bottle Creek after the first service in the morning and drive to Q in his old truck for a different service. So he's well known in the community. But I make that joke to say everybody would make fun of me with my rum company. Like, This is kind of a
Maybe
far.
later down you become a pastor too.
Listen, that would make my father very, very happy. So who knows? I mean, I grew up in the church. I've always been a strong and devout follower of my Christian faith. It's led me to every good thing that's happened in my life.
Right.
I can trace it back to God and His will. Even now, me running in this election, absolutely. My family, which I'm very, very proud of. You know, my wife, Raul Kimon, and my two kids. Like those are the things that God has given me.
Yes.
So all that, long story short, has led me to where I am today. I'm still the owner of quite a few businesses, but my main business is TCI Capital. It is a third-party lender, and we also have a mortgage and investment fund that I'm technically not the managing director now. I had to step down during the election, but depending on how it goes on February 7th, I may be back in that seat. But all that has led me to this position today, being the all-island candidate for the Progressive National Party.
Awesome. And so why did you choose, you mentioned earlier, you tried a PPP and you come to the conclusion that people rely on the two main political parties. Why did you choose the PNP and not the PDM?
Well, you'd be surprised how often I get asked that question. I think everything about the track record and the resume of the Progressive National Party going back over a decade resonates with me more as not just a young man, but the accomplishments I've had and the things I hold important. I think we've seen the greatest economic success under the Progressive National Party. When you think of the most iconic and successful leaders this country has had, following the Right Honorable James Alexander McCartney, Jegs, our first national hero. Since then, we've seen the likes of Bob Francis, Deputy-Elect Robert Hall. We've seen our current premier, Charles Washington Mizik, and then a man who has his own notoriety, our first ever premier, Honorable Michael Eugene Mizik. And he was actually the premier when I was at that most influential stage in my life. And I got to see our highway go from 2 lanes to 4 lanes. I went to see from dirt roads to sidewalks, 3-story buildings to 7-story buildings. So as a young man, it really made me believe that we as a people have control over what our Turks and Caicos Islands look like. It wasn't a mandate created by anyone else saying that you guys have to be on these dirt roads with donkey carts and dusty shoes, smile. It really meant if we wanted to be a first world country and have first world infrastructure and a first world technology, the possibility is in our hands. And that's why I felt drawn to the Progressive National Party, because I feel like I would have always fit in better there.
Right. Yeah, I remember when I was in South Caicos, right? We had all these dirt roads, right? And I couldn't believe when I went home for a visit, I think during the Michael administration, I can believe all those roads I saw paved.
Yes.
Behind our house.
What area you lived in?
Right on Basin Street.
That's Tenarity.
Yeah, by the Selena, opposite Saput and Ivy. Miss Annie Brooks.
All those roads paved now too.
Everything was paved. Yeah, man. And so I couldn't believe it when I went home many years ago.
When last you been to North Caicos?
I haven't been for a while.
That even the causeway, the bridge in North Caicos, it's still standing. We drove over it. We were campaigning in North Caicos a week ago, and you drive over it, and it makes you understand like the potential.
Yeah, and so we got to work on the roads in Provo though, because we still have a lot of dirt roads in Provo.
Well, we've seen some enhancement under this good Progressive National Party government.
Right. With all your background and your businesses and stuff like that, and being the host of the number 2 show, first edition, plus when your financial speakers number 1. What do you bring to the table and for the people of the Turks and Caicos Islands as an advocate? Why should people vote for you?
Oh, thank you. I'm gonna completely disregard that shit. But, and I think that's an excellent question. And it's important that people ask that question, especially me being a young and quasi new candidate.
Yeah.
And I think there's a myriad of reasons. One, the youth and innovation that comes along with being young. And I think the energy that comes along with it. I think it's very important for us to have a kind of a diverse selection when we talk about not just candidates, but elected officials. You cannot put a value on the experience that some of the older candidates and elected officials bring, for example, the premier and even some of the cabinet ministers.
Right.
But you always need that youthful idealism, that creativity that comes with the new exposure. Even when we see a younger generation behind me would have come from school abroad and they've seen things that me, myself, I haven't seen. And you bring that kind of creativity back home and you want to kind of encompass that into your native homeland and your culture. And I think House of Assembly should have that same representation. So if you think I'm a young man and I'm bright in that worldly exposure that my country sent me away to bring back home, the perfect place for that is in the House of Assembly, because the premier would have seen, and he's a lifelong learner. This is a person that continues to educate himself. But I would bring an interesting perspective that even himself he wouldn't have. So when we're having a conversation about what's good for young people, we can always bring our opinions to the table and say, well, this is what we think. But you can't put a value on a young person sitting at the table telling you this is what's important to young people. A lot of us at a primary and foundational level, we want good schools to send our kids to, good roads to drive on, a home that we can turn the key and own. And a lot of those things are still important to the generation before, but they would have come up when you could get a piece of residential land and a piece of commercial land, crown land, when you turn 21. But my generation, or even the generation slightly behind me, that possibility wasn't there. So we put a greater value on owning our own home and owning our own things, and lack of financing, and the list goes on. Right. And I think I bring that as a young man. Now, in terms of the skill set, not to be long-winded, I talk about the finance and the investment fund and the wealth fund management. We're at a pivotal point. I honestly believe we're at a pivotal point. The government has spent the last 4 years strengthening all these social welfare and social structures in the government in form of legislation and the creation of how to distribute the money. I think now is the perfect time to see significant economic growth and infrastructure growth. And if we look at our recurrent revenue, a lot of what we do in terms of making money, it's real sensitive, or in my opinion, it's sensitive to kind of try to maximize those revenue streams more, because there could be social impact. For example, stamp duty. Majority of the stamp duty comes from land transaction, and most of the time it's expats purchasing the land. Work permit fees. Again, every time someone pays a work permit fee, that's a job going to a non-Turks and Caicos Islander. But we rely heavily on the revenue we generate. Persons like myself has to find creative ways for the country to make money to fund some of these infrastructural growth that I would like to see happen, and not just that, to kind of create the financial structure that would ultimately lead us to independence. And I think I bring that to the table.
Awesome. And I do believe that there should be diversity in the party system. I mean, I know a lot of the young people say the young people feel left out. But I like where we will have a combination of the old and the young.
Absolutely.
I don't think someone should just be strictly young or just entirely old. I think there should be a mixture. We learn from each other. So I do like that, and I appreciate what you're saying. And you've written a number of articles in the newspaper recently. I think some of them was about pension. Yeah. Tell us about, in a nutshell, some of the things that you want to push forward based on those articles you write, or anything else you have that you want to push forward if you become successful on February 7th.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. So every article I write, I call it draft legislation. So I try to write these articles where people could really learn about me, not just as a candidate, but as an elected official. It identifies a problem, suggests a solution, and it also projects how long it would take to roll this out, whether we have to do around the island, like town hall meetings to discuss what the public opinion on it is, and just basically from the inception to it becoming legislation. So some of what people would have seen recently, and one you mentioned, is the third-party pension. And this, so majority of these have come from conversations with voters. And this one I find passionate more because it's a young person. So when we think about pension, we think about retirement, and you rarely see the impact on the younger generation. But if you look at countries, especially the Asian countries like Japan, most of them have been victims of their own success, where they have an aging generation that is putting this huge burden on the younger generation in order to provide for them. And now it's discouraging them from even having children. And they could run into some of the struggles we're having now, where our own indigenous population, where we're very reluctant to have kids. So what we've seen naturally in our culture is that in the private sector, I mean, the government has made some advancement now where there's a government pension, but in the private sector, a person could work for a company for 30, 40 years. And then when they retire, the only thing they can count on is their national insurance benefits. If you made a salary somewhere in, let's say, $4,000 or $5,000 a month, which we would consider affluent, if on the day you retire, your benefits are, for example, $1,500, I think is some of the max range, that's a huge dip in your monthly income. And that requires a huge change in your lifestyle. Yeah. And how do you ask someone? Why people still work out. They have to. Yeah. You don't have a choice, because a lot of times that elderly person, they're also providing for their family as well. So they still have younger kids who are still figuring them things out, maybe grandkids that depend on them. So it's a huge burden to ask someone to take their salary down to about 35, 40% of what it is. Yeah. And the company has benefited from 30, 40 years of sweat and tears, equity from that individual. And yes, they've made national insurance contribution equal to the employer. But I feel like we all have a role to play when, and I always say that when you start talking about a young country headed for independence, we're all going to have to make sacrifices. Yeah. Other countries have had to go to war. They've had to watch their sons and their brothers and their fathers die for independence. We're fortunate enough where our sacrifice will come probably in the form of financial equity.
So basically you're saying that the company should set aside a pension plan?
I think the company should contribute, the employee should contribute, and the government should contribute. And if all three are contributing to this pension plan,
from the national insurance.
Separate from the national insurance. And what this does is this takes, it's less of a financial burden. Mm-hmm. It takes pressure off of everyone because it's small. But the only difference between this and national insurance is if this money is invested properly over the length period, you can see some returns. Let's say we're talking 20, 30, 40 years. We can see 8, 9, 10x.
I think Cayman is doing something.
So again, nothing I'm suggesting is new. Yeah. Cayman has done it. I think Switzerland has one of the highest rated because now the government has banked it. Yeah. So this all ties into the government's investment plan. So persons who have made an annual salary, and I think theirs is like around 4,500, can see the same, if not more, in terms of pension returns when they retire. So you could have a person that retired today and they could end up making more money a month over the duration of their life. And this takes a burden off of us as young people, because a lot of young people now have to find money to help their parents as well when they retire.
You know, one thing I appreciate about Cape Wireless, a place of employment I worked for 14 years, Cape Wireless had a pension plan for all the employees. We didn't contribute anything. They contributed, I think it's 5% or 7% of your salary every month. They just put aside for us. And employees could have, if they wanted to,
contribute.
But we didn't do anything. Cape Wireless had a plan. But it's a great idea. So when we left, we had a lump sum, and it was pretty good. Mm-hmm. Nothing we contributed. Mm-hmm. And I know in America, a lot of companies are also doing that with encouraging, may not call it a pension, but have a savings as you earn plan. Mm-hmm. We even tried that Cape Wireless as well. In addition to that, a save as you earn. We encourage people to put aside so much of their salary into a savings plan, and they can't touch it. And when they leave, they could get the money. And I think that's the whole idea is to make sure people have enough money when they can retire and have a great life. They don't have to work when there's,
absolutely.
So I like the concept.
So, and I think that's important. So the goal is for us to be an independent country someday, right? Uh-huh. What you said, voluntary in suggesting or encouraging. I think we're going to have to make a sacrifice where things that other countries can encourage, we have to make law, because we're going to have to create we're going to have to create a culture. So 30, 40 years down the line, we will then see the world. We see a people that knows how to save money, understands when you're 20, you should still be thinking about your retirement. So we can't ask people. We have to think about the next generation. Uh-huh. So we have to create laws. We have to make things mandatory so that in 30, 40 years, it's embedded in our culture where we become a people known of saving money, understanding the value of being comfortable in the later
Absolutely.
stages of
Yeah.
your life.
Well, that'd be great. I think that's a great thing for us to do. We need to create a culture of savings in our country
And investing.
and investing.
Mhm.
So if it takes legislation, then let's do it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just one, right? I mean, we could go on all day. Like the third party pension was one. I want to see a maternity leave, same mandatory contributions from the employer, government. We need to encourage our next generation to have children.
But we have maternity leave, and they get 60%.
So the employer, and again, these are
The employer is not obligated to pay the 40%.
Exactly.
Because national insurance will pay the 60.
So again, not obligated, whereas like not obligated and encouraged.
So you will make sure they get
Absolutely.
You'll make sure that people on maternity leave get 100%.
Absolutely.
The 60 from national insurance and 40.
Absolutely.
So I mean, with my experience, I give my staff the 40%. Yeah.
We can't count on everyone to be as good of a business person.
I
because
understand.
and that would then it wouldn't discourage, especially mothers, local mothers, from wanting to have children. They don't have to worry about that significant dip in their salary during this time.
Okay.
And again, if we start talking about the articles and draft legislation, it will kind of take up the entire.
I understand. But those are some good points. I want to talk about crime. You know, a lot of people now, especially during this season, a lot of people politicize crime.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not one of those persons who believe that any political party has the answers for crimes. I saw recently where there's a campaign on crime where people are based
statistics,
right, and then they're encouraging people, to vote for the opposition.
Yes. Because
under this PNP administration, over the past 4 years, these are the crimes that took place.
Mm-hmm.
What do you say to that sort of strategy that the opposition is using? Telling people, look at what happened under this PNP administration. Look how many crimes, look how many murders were over the 4 years.
So I'll say this, and I like to stay in my lane in terms of my perspective as a young person and a young politician, a young candidate. And that, to me, that I find it very discouraging. And I've a lot of things I've seen during this election makes me very worried in terms of, will we continue to get the best and brightest to put their name up to run in elections in the future? And I'll tell you why. I think when we campaign on negativity, especially rhetoric and even that would be considered fear mongering.
Promises we can't deliver.
You're basically telling the next generation that if you are a person that kind of wants to stay above the fray, if you want to keep it about the issues, if you want to build a platform on innovation and what I can do, and here's how we can do it, and this is my track record, you're basically telling them the electoral politics is no place for them. And I'm genuinely concerned that if we continue going down this road, the only people who will continually recycling politicians, those who've already gone through it and experienced it and know they can handle it. I've been very fortunate that I have a supportive family and a supportive extended family. The party that I'm with has been incredibly supportive and just encouraging me that this isn't the kind of campaign we're going to run. We don't have to worry about that. We keep it about issues. We keep it about resume. And me, I should keep it about what I want to do.
Yeah.
But what about the young person, that bright young person that's possibly going to take us to independence someday? What if that person is discouraged by looking at this and thinking, this is no place for me. Yeah. I don't want to be in the gutter. Because again, a young person like myself, I have no reason to go negative. All I have is positivity. All I have is innovative ideas. All I have is, here's what I believe we can do. So if I'm a voter right now, and here's one candidate talking about completely reimagining Turks and Caicos, focus on what you want your Turks and Caicos to look like, and here's how we can get there. I have the strategies, I have the know-how, I have the team, we can do this. And then on the other side, all you're hearing is, they didn't do this, they didn't do that, these happened under it. You start to ask yourself, what exactly am I voting for? So I'm in no position to kind of chastise anyone or tell people what they shouldn't do. But I'm very comfortable providing the perspective from a young candidate and a young voter and saying there's nothing appealing about that.
Yeah. And I think politicians potential. They have to be very careful what they put out there, because I remember, I think when Dr. Rufus was the premier, and that time the opposition campaign on, this 12-point plan, okay, and then Honorable Charlene became the premier, and from the outside we think we all have the answer when you get in government, and when she came in with her team, in the end, Honorable Robertson came and she concluded that it's beyond their control, basically.
Absolutely.
She said that it's spiritual, and so here again, we're going through the same thing about the crime situation, knowing that the previous leader already concluded, wait a minute, this is a spiritual issue that is taking place in Turks and Caicos. And I too believe that's a spiritual issue.
Absolutely.
I honestly believe it's a spiritual issue. I don't care if it's PNP or PDM. We have a spiritual issue that we need to tackle, and then we'll see a reduction in crime.
Drex, you are so right. I'll take it a step further. It is a spiritual, it is a cultural, it is a social. The only way for a country to be this successful economically while still having this kind of rampant gun violence and senseless death means that there is a comprehensive change that needs to take place. It involves the Foreign Office doing their part, the police doing their part, the community doing their part, the church doing their part. We all need to come together and admit that we haven't been doing enough. And I was having a conversation with a lady in Grand Turk the other day, and she is a grandmother dealing with the fallout of another senseless murder of her grandson, a young man. And while we're always having this conversation and we're pointing fingers and we're talking about the numbers, how often do we even talk about the trauma associated with this kind of death?
Families.
And the community. So I had a conversation with my father. My father's in his 70s. And he's just now having to face reality in terms of watching people he grew up with pass away.
Right.
And it's a very convenient way. Oh, they had a great life. They talk about it in such an endearing way. Me at my age have had to see people I went to school with, people I know, people who have children. I've had to go to their funerals and bury them long before their time. That has an impact
very sad.
on you. It is.
You're right.
And we don't even think about this, especially when silly season comes around. We don't care anymore because these people don't have families. They don't have friends. We just throw them around like they're numbers. And that, I think that in itself helps to further your point that it is a deeply embedded spiritual problem.
Deeper than what we have. Well, Mr. Jolly, we have to wrap up now. And I just want to thank you for being a guest on the show. But before we leave, I need you, to tell us, why we should vote for you and why should we vote for the PNP party.
Absolutely. Thank you again for having me on your show today. So I talked a little bit about the things I hope to accomplish as an elected official. And I didn't even get the opportunity to get into my specialty or words I like to talk about. It's not just young people, but money, financial independence. Before I get into it, I want to say this. Young people, young Turks and Caicos Islanders, we are at a truly pivotal point. You have the opportunity now to completely reimagine your version of Turks and Caicos. The only limits to what we can create are the limits of your imagination. There is nothing we can't do. If we want this place to be the Dubai, the Saudi Arabia, the whatever, the Shangri-La of the Caribbean, we can do this. My articles have gone from Turks and Caicos Islands, the cleanest country in the Caribbean, to Turks and Caicos Islands, the Crown Land Sovereign Fund creator. A person like myself, if elected, hopes to achieve the kind of legislation that will give us the financial or the revenue in our government to create this. One of the main goals I want to see is a complete infrastructural development plan where we finally take on the responsibility of paving every road, creating every sidewalk in the residential districts, as well as a master revamping of the highway here in Provo, as well as the roads in the other islands, the outer islands as well. Even taking it to the step of looking at what the causeway connecting Provo all the way to South Caicos would cost. Once we know how much a huge infrastructure upgrade like this would cost, then we can start focusing on raising the funds to do it. I've talked about the Crown Land Sovereign Fund, where we completely reinvent the way we look at Crown land. The days where every person can get an acre, 5 acres or over, We need to bank every bit of Crown land and plan out its development. And not just plan it out, but figure out how we're going to monetize it. Every developer should never own land. There should be lease agreements attached to it where we constantly generate revenue, not just the actual project from the staff housing and then housing for us as Turks and Caicos Islanders. Imagine if all the major hotels in this country were built on land leased to the government, not owned by the developer, where we would still generate revenue annually. And if a developer or a hotel owner ever threatens to not pay taxes, which we've seen in the past, we're not at risk of having issues in terms of eminent domaining or taking back what's rightfully ours. We talk about land, or I've talked about land tax, land property tax on land owned by Turks and Caicos Islanders. We have this large inventory of land just sitting there that persons get to develop at their will because there's no fee outside of the initial stamp duty that would have been paid decades ago when the land was significantly less in value. There should be land tax associated with the value of the land after annual assessment of the value, and persons should be constantly paying into our system. You cannot just own a piece of our heritage and not pay on it. And these kind of strategies would create alternative revenue generators for the Turks and Caicos Islands. And something that I've become very passionate about recently, during the Industrial Revolution in the United States, the U.S. government came up with the Pacific Railway Act. I think it was in the 1860s. They wanted to put railroads all across the U.S., connecting the West Coast to the East Coast, making it easier to move materials back and forth, making the country basically smaller and easier to travel. They came up with an idea. They found out how much it would cost. And in order to fund it, they used government-backed saving bonds, interest bonds, to back this development. They were able to raise quite a bit of cash to basically take on this project. We've been touting no debt since 2013, 2014. This country has been in a very fortunate position financially. We can now plan out our debt. We can plan out how we're going to borrow money and how we're going to spend it. Using a bond system, we wouldn't actually have to borrow money. We can use successful money that's already in this country. We have so many successful Turks and Caicos Islanders. We have so many affluent individuals here. These are just creative ways we can generate the kind of revenue that would take us to the next level. We talk about $1 billion, $2 billion budget in 5 years. Persons like myself, I honestly believe, can help us get us there. And I would only feel at home in a party like the Progressive National Party that would have laid the foundation under the leadership of the Premier Charles Washington Mizik, who helped to put the Sovereign Fund together, who helped to put the social foundation that's here that we can now focus on economic development. So on February 7th, I'm not just asking you to vote for a young, innovative candidate like Zhavargo Jolly. I'm asking you to vote for the entire Progressive National Party team and help us not only make government, but secure your future and help us make sure that the Turks and Caicos Island continues to be and also grows as the gem, not only for the Caribbean, but the entire world.
All right, that was good. That's good.
A little long-winded.
That's okay. I just want to thank you again.
Oh, thank you.
I want to thank all of you for watching the Draxel SEMA show. Of course, you've seen my conversation here with Mr. Zhavargo Jolly, who is an at-large candidate for the Progressive National Party. For those of you that know of him, you know more of him now. And hopefully, based on our conversation today, you can decide whether you want to choose him as one of your candidates in the upcoming election. Thank you.